I'll never forget that. The Barker's voice just telling people to take it easy, that everything was going to be okay. But everything was not okay.
Everyone started getting up and running and screaming.
He had his foot caught in there, and we couldn't get him out.
The people who were laying there looked just like rag dolls. They were just featureless.
On July 6, 1944, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus Big Top caught fire during a performance in Hartford, Connecticut. After less than 10 minutes of unimaginable horror, nearly 170 people, mostly women and children, were either dead or dying. Hundreds were injured. The fire rendered itself beyond the weeks of funerals in its aftermath and the suffering of the injured. Mysteries about the cause of the blaze and the identities of 6 unknown victims deepened as the decades slipped past. Yet its most chilling aspect, one that silently haunted survivors and relatives of the dead, stood apart from everything else. People were killed because several obscure and insignificant events coalesced on a steamy July afternoon in the last place on Earth where people expected it to happen. In the 1940s, the demands of World War II altered Hartford's economic and social life. Vital munitions and material for Allied troops in Europe and Asia poured from its factories. Money flowed in to pay for it, and thousands of people came to the city for the money. Spurred by the insatiable demands of a fully industrialized war, the home office of Connecticut Yankeehood had become a 24-hour-a-day boomtown of 167,000 people. The social dislocations caused by the war did not threaten the popularity of a tradition that Hartford anticipated with the same spirit as that of a holiday: the annual appearance of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus on Barber Street. Circuses had routinely performed in Hartford since the late 19th century, and the city carried a reputation within performance circles as being particularly receptive to such shows. In 1940, the Circus Fans of America group even held its annual convention at Hartford's Bond Hotel when the Ringling Brothers show was in town. A portable city that moved by rail, wheels, and brute force, the circus was a self-sufficient community of 600 workers and 800 performers. Cooks prepared 3 hot meals a day to feed a traveling army commanded by the rhythms of circus life and show business. The center of this traveling city was the Big Top, the main performance tent. It was almost as long as 2 football fields and wide as 1. It soared 5 stories high. Despite many technological advances over the first half of the 20th century, the circus remained curiously rooted in the 19th. It deployed animals to help erect tents and move rigging. Less evident was the use of an ancient waterproofing formula for its tenting. In May 1944, that formula was applied to a fresh canvas delivered from the circus sail loft at Ringling Brothers winter headquarters in Sarasota, Florida. 70 workers mixed a cocktail of 6,000 gallons of white gasoline and 1,800 pounds of paraffin wax and spread it on the canvas. Boss canvasman Leonard Aylesworth, who had been with the circus for 30 years, supervised. The formula permitted rain to run over the sides of the tent, but it also was a highly flammable concoction that was known to turn minor fires into roaring conflagrations. In 1910, the Barnum and Bailey Big Top caught fire in Schenectady, New York during a performance. 2 years later in Sterling, Illinois, a fire roared through the main tent moments before a crowd of 10,000 would have entered it for an afternoon matinee. There were no deaths in either incident. On August 4th, 1942 in Cleveland, the menagerie tent caught fire shortly before noon. The blaze consumed the canvas within minutes. 45 animals perished. In no time at all, a witness reported, the sides and top of the canvas were down. The cause of the menagerie fire was never determined, and the show went on, as it had in the past, under tents treated with paraffin and gasoline. The 1944 Ringling Brothers season opened on April 7th with a 7-week run indoors at New York's Madison Square Garden. A 2-week stand at Boston Garden followed before the outdoor season got underway in Philadelphia on June 6th. From there, the circus moved to Waterbury, New Haven, and Bridgeport, Connecticut, Worcester and Fitchburg, Massachusetts, Manchester, New Hampshire, and Portland, Maine. By July 3rd, it reached Providence. In June 1944, billboard teams fanned out over Hartford and covered the city with advertisements proclaiming that the greatest show on earth would appear twice daily on July 5th and 6th. The circus acted as a centrifugal force across the region and around Hartford's North End. Dozens of children earned 50 cents a day or received free passes for helping circus crews.
I had the role of bringing water from the fire hydrant across the street. There was a fire hydrant and there was one on the same side, to the watering troughs for the elephants, particularly in the animals, and also at the time that they would pay us to spread the hay.
And what was involved really was taking bales of straw or sawdust shavings to put them on the ground. They used an awful lot of it in those days for the animals. Bringing the buckets of water to feed the elephants the water, or just giving them to the trainers so that they could in turn bring the water into the cages. And the stronger ones, the stronger young fellas, were used to even stake some of the stakes for the tents.
North of Hartford in Southampton, Massachusetts, the 3 Cook children, 9-year-old Donald, Eleanor 8, and Edward 6, awaited the circus as well. Their lives had not been easy.
Life had not been that good, or it had been very poor when I was 1, 2, 3 years old. You get a little toughened up then. Not having any heat in a house in the wintertime. And I remember playing in a mud puddle that was iced over. I didn't have anything but just some little sandal shoes. I was out there playing around in it.
After her husband abandoned the family, Mildred Cook moved alone to a rooming house on Marshall Street in Hartford, where jobs were plentiful because of the war. The children, meanwhile, stayed in Southampton with Mildred's brother, Ted Parsons, and his wife, Marion. Mildred missed her children and tried to visit them often. In July 1944, she happily revealed a secret treat. She had purchased tickets for the matinee performance of the circus on July 5th. East of Hartford in Vernon, Connecticut, 7-year-old Elliot Smith prepared to attend the circus with his mother and sister.
The decision was made that we were going to be going to the circus. We had arranged to get a ride into Hartford with a neighbor. And even though that day was brutally hot and humid, parents cannot say no to kids.
Meanwhile, on Cornwall Street in the north end of Hartford, Marvin Lappick followed the idyllic life of a 13-year-old boy in summertime America. His younger brother Seymour tagged along.
We got on our bicycles if we went anywhere. Went in those days maybe to Keeney Park, but I was fortunate enough living next to Rawson School was a block away, and I think we spent all day long playing baseball or kicking a soccer ball or whatever we were doing at that time, or even sometimes just lying on the lawn and waiting for the ice cream man.
In early July, Lappick's mother, Sarah, disclosed that she would be taking the 2 boys to the matinee performance on July 6th. The perfect summer just got better for Marvin and his brother. Also in Hartford, Donalda Lavoie awaited the show with growing excitement.
This was the big circus. This was the big event. And my uncle and my brother-in-law, and I can't remember if there was somebody else with us or not, but we made plans to go over to see it.
The circus so captured the imagination of 6-year-old Anthony Pastizzo that when his uncle Frank Spinelli promised to take him to the circus, All he could think about was the upcoming show.
I was looking forward to the circus. I was busily coloring my coloring book the day before, and my neighbors were sort of excited for me and reminded me that I was about to see something very nice the next day, and what a lucky kid I was.
In Euclid, Ohio, Hartford native Bill Curley turned homeward for his vacation. He planned to take his son David and brother-in-law Albert and his daughter to the matinee performance on July 6th. 2 kids from the old neighborhood in Hartford would go with them as well.
Bill was a real gentleman. He was a fine father and a fine husband. He was very kind to me, and we all loved him.
On July 4th, the traditional Christmas in July party marked an otherwise uneventful 2-day stay in Rhode Island, heading into the Hartford dates. But a trend that started in Philadelphia and went undetected by circus management persisted there. A fire occurred. Seatmen such as Neil Todd were assigned to stay on guard under the stands during performances, watching for cigarettes or matches tossed from above by spectators. In Philadelphia, he had doused a fire in the sidewall tent before it spread to the big top. In Portland, a fire burned tent ropes before a sideman put it out. In Providence, Todd tossed a bucket of water on a small sidewall fire to keep it from igniting the main tent. Todd later said that a dozen minor fires had occurred between the end of May and early July. He reported the Providence fire to Aylesworth, who told him to notify sailmaker George Kelly for repair work. "I fixed a lot this season," said Kelly. Early on July 5th, the circus train moved toward Hartford, but it was running late. Once in the city, roustabouts staked the grounds on a west to east access, with the main entrance on Barber Street leading eastward to an open menagerie area and the midway before reaching the main performance tent. Dozens of men and neighborhood boys scrambled to erect the big top and associated structures on Barber Street. Management scratched the matinee performance to give crews time to finish setting up the tent complex, but went ahead with plans to open that night. Circus performers were wary. According to show business lore, performers paid for canceled performances with bad luck down the road. For the Cook family of Southampton, Massachusetts, the cancellation meant bad luck right away. But Mildred Cook was resourceful. She exchanged her July 5th matinee tickets for the matinee on the 6th and took the children swimming.
The day before, because we didn't go to the circus, we went to a swimming pool in New Britain, and a child drowned the day before at that swimming pool when we were there. And that was sort of an impact. It sort of put a little bit of a damper on the whole day to start with.
As crews completed preparations for the evening's opening performance, the disturbing trend outlined in patches on the canvas sewn by sailmaker George Kelly in Philadelphia, Portland, and Providence was forgotten or ignored. In Hartford, as in other stops, fire extinguishers were kept inside electrical trucks, not deployed under the seats as circus policy, if not practice, dictated. Fire drills weren't held, and new employees were not schooled in fire safety on the road. The circus did make sure that 24 water buckets were distributed evenly under the seats in case cigarettes tossed from the stand smoldered on a sidewall or on the ground. The July 5th evening performance went on as scheduled. Canvas boss Leonard Aylesworth made his rounds of the seatmen underneath the bleachers just before the performance opened. All was in order. On the morning of the 6th, Aylesworth headed to Springfield to inspect the next stop for the circus. Meanwhile, thousands of people from the area converged on Hartford for the circus. The temperature and the humidity thickened throughout the morning and into the afternoon. 8,500 spectators, including State Police Commissioner Edward Hickey, filled the Barber Street grounds for the matinee performance of July 6th.
As I approached, I could see some elephants that were standing along the side of the tent. Somebody was scrubbing them down. I could hear a lot of excitement. I could hear barkers trying to sell their popcorn and their soda pop.
I walked around outside. We see different animal shows and whatnot, whatever they was having. We looked at that. I did, and then we decided we'd go in. You know, it was time to go into the tent and see the show on in there.
The circus, of course, was wonderment. It looked huge. It was crowded. It was busy.
Some who spotted better places to see the show walked across the center expanse and used wooden stairs placed over railings to get there. The crowd eagerly awaited the performance and were particularly excited about seeing the Walendas, the high wire act that had thrilled crowds during the evening performance. The performance began 8 minutes late, at 2:23 p.m. A wild animal training parody opened the show, followed by The Real Thing. In the East Ring, Al Court understudy Joe Walsh performed with 6 lions. May Kovar worked her 18 pumas and leopards in the first ring by the entrance on the west side of the tent.
I was again awestruck by the enormity of how large tigers really were, and never seen a wild animal like that as a child before. I was just amazed at how large these beasts were. And to see them performing with a human inside that cage, I was really amazed that how could anyone gather enough courage to work with an animal this size and that ferocious. And this is a tiger I'm looking at.
Earlier, prop men assembled steel chutes that channeled the cats in and out of the rings. The chutes temporarily blocked exits on the northwest and northeast sides of the tent, except for wooden stairs placed on top of the cages. The prop men stood by to remove the chutes once the animals moved safely back to their cages. As the animal act wound down at about 2:40 p.m., seatmen William Calley and John Cook moved from their spots under the southwest bleachers to the northwest bleachers. There, they'd make sure the prop men didn't bump into wooden jacks holding up the stands when removing the animal chutes. A witness who was in the men's toilet minutes before the show began reported afterward that he saw nothing out of the ordinary. But while the first 2 acts of the performance were going on, a fire broke out and strengthened there just south of the main entrance. It burned quickly and generated enough heat to ignite a portion of the adjacent sidewall tent behind a bank of general admission seats on the southwest side of the big top. From a 30-foot-high platform on the north side of the tent, Henrietta Walenda spotted the small fire burning through the sidewall on the southwest corner. "I thought someone would put it out," she said later. On the same platform, Herman Walenda sensed danger. "If the canvas starts on the side, nothing can stop it. I mean, if the fire starts on the side, it can't be stopped," he thought. On the other side of the high wire, Carl Walenda heard someone scream, "Fire!" and he spotted the small fire eating away at the sidewall. He saw it spread rapidly to the top and motioned for his colleagues to climb from the poles and get out.
The trapeze guy was the clue to really indicate where the fire was, because he had glanced over in that direction and pointed and shouted out, "Fire." And at that point I heard other people screaming, "Fire," and it was to our left. We heard the screaming from our left. So my Uncle Frank and I just glanced in that direction, and that's when I did spot the fire, which had already, I would say, if I were to estimate the size of the fire at that point, it was probably about 5 feet in diameter in the very corner of the tent. That's when I first saw it.
To the right of the main entrance, usher Kenneth Gwinnell spotted the fire and alerted fellow ushers Louis Runyon and Mike D'Addario. The 3 raced to the sidewall and emptied 3 buckets of water on the fire, to no effect. The flames continued to gnaw upward to the gasoline and wax-treated big top. Runyon tried to pull down the sidewall, but it was too late. Inside the railings of the performance area, ushers who had seen sidewall fires in Providence and other cities assured spectators that it would be over in a minute. The seatmen would take care of it with their water buckets, they said. But the seatmen had moved to the north side of the tent away from the fire.
I looked over partly like 2 o'clock, and I saw side of the tent, there was a flame. And I said to my uncle, you know, there's a fire there. And he says, don't worry, they'll put it out. And we watched what was going on in the rings, and then we looked over again, and it had spread wider.
Cries of fire spread throughout the tent as more and more people spotted the small blaze gnawing away at the sidewall. The entire crowd then stood and stared in silence at the fire. In a moment, that sense of disbelief suddenly turned to one of horror and became manifest in behavior. Panic enveloped the tent.
My mother grabbed my hand and started down the ramp, the tiers. She said that that's the way the ushers were directing us, back toward the main entrance where we had come in. My sister turned tail and ran away from the fire, up the tiers. And she jumped down, somebody caught her below, and then she crawled under the edge of the tent and escaped.
My mother wanted to take both the children with her, and they went down the steps. I didn't go that way. I went straight across the top until the fire caught up on me. Then I dropped down, climbed down the framework, and got out underneath the tent.
Merle Evans ordered the circus band to keep playing, and an announcer pleaded for calm over the public address system. Neither tactic worked.
I'll never forget that. The barker's voice just telling people to take it easy, that everything was going to be okay. But everything was not okay.
The panic was just total. You know, it was a milling mass of people, a lot of pushing and shoving and jostling, and my hand got torn out of my mother's. So there I was alone, being shoved and carried along with the crowd, as you will. And actually I started punching with my fists, trying to get room for myself to be able to negotiate or move in my own fashion. I was just being swept along and jostled and bumped until finally I got knocked down.
Many spectators made it out quickly through the main entrance or through exits in the middle of the tent. A few scurried down poles and slipped out under the sidewall. Some knocked over folding chairs in the reserved section and trampled fallen children to get to the ground. Others raced eastward within the tent walls toward the exit straddling the bandstand. The sheets of flame, however, were faster. The fire fastened itself to the big top and feasted on the paraffin and gas cocktail that coated the canvas. It drew energy from the hot air bellowing upward from inside the tent. A sudden west-to-east breeze supplied additional velocity and steered panicked spectators toward the 3.5-foot steel animal chutes that blocked the exit on the northeast side of the tent.
We were totally overrun by the crowd, just knocked totally apart. And I went sprawling. Was separated from my brother. And I went back, and he was lying on the ground, and he had his foot caught in, it was a folding chair that we were sitting in now, and he had his foot caught in there, and we couldn't get him out. And I remember sort of screaming at people, let us get loose, and they just were running right amok.
At fire headquarters, firefighter Frederick Green received the first alarm from the fire at 2:44 p.m. He thought it routine and dispatched the usual contingent of 3 engine companies and 2 trucks. Soon, other alarms poured into the station, and more trucks raced toward Barber Street. The firefighters would be helpless against a fire of this magnitude. The blaze burst upward as melting wax formed rivulets in the seams and sent vapors skyward, channeling the force of the blaze toward the 6 poles at the center of the big top. The fire forked at the top of the tent and descended to the sidewalls on all sides. As the fire moved to the top of the tent, it sent embers and balls of flaming wax onto the heavily lacquered seats and bleachers. The fire surrounded people still inside. In the northwest part of the tent, people crawled over the first line of animal chutes erected to channel May Kovar's pumas and panthers through. Kovar kept the animals moving through as terrified children and adults crawled over the ribbed chute and scrambled eastward to the back of the tent or turned northward and got out. Kovar helped people, particularly children, climb over the chute while controlling her animals within it. Huge numbers of people surged toward the northeast part of the tent and piled up behind the animal chute. Lions running through the cage snarled at people and clawed upward through the ribbed cage as men, women, and children climbed over the barrier to safety.
I was frightened because I could see the animals, you know, they're getting them back out of the ring so they wouldn't be in the fire. And we're trying to crawl over, and it seemed like there was some pretty big spaces. I mean, the bars were pretty wide, and we were trying to crawl over, and they were pretty high. But everybody was helping everybody, and we got over safely.
In the chaos of the tent floor, William Curley and his 7-year-old son David became separated from his brother-in-law Albert and his daughter and 2 neighborhood kids. The crowd trapped Curley near the animal chute, but he stood his ground and tossed David over the chute to safety. He continued to help children and women over the barrier even after his son reached safety. Police officers James Kenefick, Henry Griffin, and James Healy threw people over the chute too and worked frantically to tear about the steel tubing. They pulled people whose feet became lodged in the cage ribbing, but the fire was moving too fast for the 3 to remain there and survive. Donald Cook, meanwhile, raced along the bleachers and dropped about 12 feet to the ground. His mother, sister, and brother had gone toward the floor with the crowd, and now he stood alone outside the tent as it burned. In the reserved seats, Marvin Lappick struggled to free his brother Seymour, whose foot was caught in a folding chair that went down during the first moments of panic.
Why didn't I pick the chair up, you know? And I don't know, it might have even bolted down for all I know, and I could not have gotten loose, but I couldn't get his foot out of there. And the boy, he was crying.
7-year-old Elliot Smith fell under the onslaught of adults.
Being small, I went down first. I was on the ground with my face pressed into the dirt. And I could see the reflection of the fire above me, but I thought it was the dirt right under me that was on fire, and I was spitting at it, trying to put it out. I could barely move a muscle because of the people on top of me. And the screaming went on, and there were people praying.
Even as adults pushed and trampled children, untold numbers of men and women kept others, particularly children, from dying.
When this man carried me on his shoulders right out through the tent, I can remember being outside in the hotness of the sun and everything, and just as he was going to put me down, my mother was yelling my name, and she saw me in front of her on this man's shoulder, and she watched him where he went, and she got me when he put me down.
My uncle stopped because he had spotted a little girl that had tripped on the ground. And at that point, you just can't imagine the horrendous horde of people that, to me, it was a horrendous horde of people that were just running in the same direction. And it appeared to me as if the little girl was going to be trampled. But my uncle saw that, stopped for a moment, picked that little girl up, put the little girl on his left shoulder. I was on his right shoulder, and we began to proceed to go out the right side of the tent.
Donald Anderson took a jackknife from his pocket and cut a hole in the sidewall large enough for people to escape. Hundreds survived because of that.
To get down, I had to climb down, hang on from the top bleacher, and drop down to the ground. But I got down there and I couldn't push the tent open because I had a rope inside and out so people couldn't sneak in. So rather than fight City Hall, I remembered I had a knife. I opened a knife and I cut a hole and I got out. Trouble is, people followed me out there and I couldn't get back in. I had to make another hole to get back in, and I finally found my companion. And on the way out, there was a little girl that they were trampling, so I pulled her out.
Somewhere amid the madness and death of the tent, Mildred Cook became separated from her daughter Eleanor. Like many others inside the inferno, the overwhelming blast of heat got to Mildred Cook. She stopped to rest for a moment with her son as the fire and panic raged around her. The heat inside the tent reached 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit at the height of the fire, cooking people who were blocked from safety by the animal chutes, or who had been injured and unable to get out on their own. As it burned its way to the top of the tent, the fire chewed through thick ropes and loops that connected the big top to the center poles. Many supporting poles fell, crushing people on their way to the ground. The tent collapsed in a heap on people inside, incinerating the bodies of the dead and burning people who were still trying to claw their way to safety. The screams and cries witnesses heard amid the roar of the fire continued, but most of the people were doomed as the fire consumed everything in its path.
All you heard was the screaming, and we found out why the screaming later, because people were dying.
As the tent burned and collapsed amid the screams of the dying, a ragged army of singed and shocked survivors swarmed through Hartford's North End.
Oh, people coming out to clothes on fire. You know, some people thought enough to take something and roll them in the ground. Some people came out and rolled in the ground themselves, if you really look at it. It was just panicky, like, help, help me, help me. And those that you would try to help, I remember, they would wanted to go back in because they left somebody there.
There were people laying on the ground. There were firemen, and they must have been nurses because they were in civilian clothes and all, and they were trying to wait on them, and people just wandering around with blank faces, just looking around. It's,
They moved through backyards and pleaded with homeowners to use a telephone to call home. Many searched for their children, parents, relatives, or friends who got lost along the way. Some simply wanted to go as far away from the circus grounds as possible.
And I ran up from all the way from up there to Bellevue Square, 72 Bellevue Square. And when I got upstairs on the second floor where I live, I fainted.
Children who could not find their parents were collected by police and taken to the Brown School. There, they waited for their parents to take them home.
So I went about playing with my friends, and my mother was at work, and at 5 o'clock, 5:30, she took the bus home, and there I was playing on the corner of Albany and Vine, and she got off the bus, and I ran to her to greet her, and she hugged me so hard, I can still feel it.
The fire burned out after consuming the canvas and gutting the bleachers. Firefighters had no chance against a force that moved with such overwhelming strength and speed, but they still had a job to do. They doused the smoldering debris and teamed with volunteer rescuers to search the scorched ground for anybody who might have survived the twin terrors of flame and panic. And they did find a handful of survivors, even some under the pile of bodies welded to each other near one of the steel chutes.
They got the people off me, and then a man scooped me up like one would carry a baby, because I was small. I was, again, only 7. He was wearing a white shirt. I remember thinking he was going to ruin his shirt.
Ambulances, private cars, and trucks conveyed the burned and injured to the city's hospitals. Municipal Hospital received the first victim and the largest number of patients. Doctors examined 143 patients within 80 minutes of the first alarm from the circus grounds. Hartford Hospital and St. Francis Hospital also received many burn victims.
As we're going into the entranceway of the St. Francis Hospital, we had to pass a lot of people that were laying on benches on either side, and they were in different shades of color on their face and skin, and I had thought at that time that we were walking by clowns, and later I learned that most of that discoloration was due to the fire and the nearness of the flames, that the flames had caused that coloration on them.
All patients were given morphine on admission. Badly burned skin made the intravenous delivery of plasma difficult, but doctors and nurses made do. Dressing teams applied Vaseline-laced gauze to burns and covered dressings with plaster casts, which were later changed to ace bandages. On Barber Street, the stench of burnt flesh filled the air as the bodies were prepared for transport to the State Armory, where officials ordered a temporary morgue set up.
The smell was just, you could smell the flesh burning. It was bad.
It was a very, very hot day, a very hot, still day. And the smells did not move. It was just not healthy.
The Armory's cavernous drill shed received the dead and served as the site for the identification of remains. 127 bodies, some burned beyond recognition, were placed on cots and covered with blankets to await identification. A chillingly efficient system was used to identify the bodies. Clerks registered the names of visitors and collected information on casualties, the missing and the dead. Nurses and police officers stood by to escort people permitted to view the bodies. Clerks compiled 3 lists, one each for the missing, injured, and dead. The War Council set up 3 first aid stations within the Armory to assist people who might become hysterical at the sight of the dead, but the stations went largely unused. Sadness and heartache, suffered largely in silence by relatives and friends of the dead, enveloped the drill shed. One father identified his entire family and was quietly led from the drill shed floor. A mother, her beloved daughter, and the scene was replayed dozens of times. Between the opening of the morgue, hours after the fire on the 6th, and 9 p.m. on July 7th, 2,500 people viewed the dead. All but 15 had been identified there. The remaining bodies were taken to the refrigerated morgue at Hartford Hospital because the remains were decomposing rapidly in the summer heat. Only 6 would remain unidentified by July 9th. Among the people who identified the dead was David Lappick, Marvin's father, who found his son Seymour there. The family tragedy, however, still had not run its course.
In the meantime, my mother was in the hospital, and I had gone to see her, and we had no thoughts about her being in any danger or whatever. But the biggest thing that we had was the question she kept asking about my brother, and we had not told her yet that we had not been able to, you know, that he was not alive. And then she was gone. My father, he would come home every night and just sit in his chair, and this was before television, and we used, you know, radios, but he would just sit in his chair and stare blankly.
William Curley's brother-in-law identified his remains at the morgue too. He was killed by a falling quarter pole and 4th-degree burns after saving the lives of many spectators at the animal shoot.
He knew that was Bill on that ground, because his son said, "Daddy, a red thing fell on my daddy," because he just got David out, just made it. But then he was knocked down, and he was burned there.
Donald Cook, meanwhile, awaited reports of the condition of his mother Mildred and brother Edward, both hospitalized at Municipal. His sister Eleanor was missing.
We went to the hospital, found Edward first, then found my mother. Never did find Eleanor.
Edward died on the morning of the 7th. As more and more people collected remains of their loved ones, the demand for caskets and burial plots overwhelmed funeral parlors and cemeteries in Hartford and surrounding towns. Rolls of the dead were published daily in the newspapers. Alice Boyajian and her 2 children of Hartford perished. The Brooks family of Plainville suffered the loss of Dorothy and her 3 children. The Norris family of Middletown had 3 dead and 1 missing. Church services were held and funeral processions rolled steadily through the streets toward cemeteries such as Fairview in West Hartford and Mount St. Benedict in Hartford, where 16 burials took place on July 10th alone. The last 2 victims of the fire died in early August, bringing the official death toll to 168, but only 167 bodies were buried. Body parts taken from the circus grounds were grouped under a single death certificate and cremated. The parts were never mentioned again in any official records, and no attempt was made to group them with the unidentified dead. No circus performers were killed or seriously injured. As the last of the dead were buried, the injured continued to recover from their burns. Only 140 required hospitalization, but some spent months in the hospital undergoing painful treatment.
I had skin grafts. Those were the bad times, because the anesthetic at that time was ether, and the hangover from that was horrendous. The nightmares one would encounter while under ether were horrendous.
Children found ways to keep themselves active and amused in the hospital.
Play hide and seek. One would, stay in the room while the other one went off down the hall, took an elevator to another floor, hid in a supply room or what have you. The other would go find him.
On July 10th, Hartford officials gathered at Northwood Cemetery to bury the 6 remaining unidentified bodies. The number of missing and the number of unidentified bodies both stood at 6. But 5 of the bodies were charred beyond recognition. The failure to identify one of the unknown victims, a girl thought to be 6 years old, baffled investigators because her face had not been badly burned. Of the missing, 3 were children: 6-year-old Raymond Erickson of Middletown, 6-year-old Judy Norris, also of Middletown, and 8-year-old Eleanor Cook of Southampton, Massachusetts. But no one had linked the body of the young girl to either Norris or Cook. She had been found on the circus grounds and taken to Municipal Hospital, where doctors treated her for burns and other injuries. She died at 6:45 that night and was taken to the armory. At first, medical examiner Walter Weisenborn and several nurses were convinced that she fit the description of Eleanor Cook, the daughter of Mildred Cook, who was badly burned in the fire and hospitalized. But Emily Gill, a relative from Massachusetts, told Weisenborn that it was not Eleanor. The unidentified girl became known as Little Miss 1565, after the toe tag assigned to the body. The failure to identify her haunted Hartford detectives Ed Lowe and Thomas Barber. The two canvassed the city and wrote letters to schools. Lowe and Barber had no luck, even though they both received hundreds of tips. State Police Commissioner and Fire Marshal Edward Hickey began the official investigation into the fire even as debris smoldered on the ground. Prosecutors issued blanket subpoenas for circus managers and workers. Hickey hauled dozens of circus employees, police officers, and firefighters to State Police headquarters in Hartford throughout the night of July 6th. Questioning lasted until dawn on July 7th. After his investigation, Hickey found, wrongly as it turned out, that a cigarette tossed behind the southwest bleachers started the fire. Prosecutors, however, blamed circus officials for the deaths of victims. The waterproofing formula for the big tent, paraffin and gasoline, constituted a danger to the public, they charged. Circus management would have to answer for that. Circus manager George Smith, Ringling Vice President Jack Haley, boss canvassman Leonard Aylesworth, electrician Whitey Versteeg, and truck manager David Blanchfield were charged with involuntary manslaughter and arraigned on July 7th. They pleaded no contest to the charges in 1945 and were sentenced to jail terms ranging from 6 months to 7 years. All would be released after serving less than a year. The lawsuits started to be filed within hours of the fire. Court officials appointed respected local attorney Ed Rogan to consolidate the claims to keep lawsuits from clogging state courts. A settlement was eventually reached that allocated a portion of the circus's profits to relatives of the dead and to the injured. The trauma of the fire was something that money could not erase for many victims.
I went to my son's graduation up in Massachusetts, and we walked up, and there's this great big tent, and they had all the chairs sitting around, and I got a funny feeling, but I just kept walking, and we went in, and a lot of people around, and I happened to see a man standing there smoking a cigarette. And I think I kind of lost it. I just started shaking all over.
Well, I introduced myself to the individual and said, "Do you remember me?" The answer came back, "No, should I?" And I said, "You were in the hospital next room." "Hospital? What hospital?" "After the fire." "Fire? What fire?" You know, we were standing there looking at each other, 3 feet apart. I was seeing scars where I had seen scars in the hospital afterward. And she was seeing scars where she had seen scars on me during the recuperation time in the hospital. But even with that evidence, it was just a total blocking out, apparently, of the whole event.
After leaving Hartford, the circus regrouped in Florida. It planned a shortened tour of outdoor stadiums and opened in early August at Akron's Rubber Bowl in Ohio. In 1945, the circus opened its outdoor season under a fireproof big top. Later, steel bleachers and animal chutes attached to trucks would be used. The trucks were manned and motors kept running whenever the chutes were in use. In 1948, the Big Top returned to Connecticut, but not to Hartford. It set up its tent on private grounds in Plainville, where it performed to a sellout crowd under new state laws that required fireproof tenting and the presence of local firefighters. As time put more distance between Hartford and its defining tragedy of the 20th century, one question about it endured. Who was Little Miss 1565? Detectives Ed Lowe and Thomas Barber continued to place flowers on her grave year after year, but it made little headway in the identification, although her morgue photograph had been widely circulated. In April 1950, another mystery emerged. Could the fire have been started by an arsonist? When questioning former circus roustabout Robert Seegee about a fire near Columbus, Ohio, police heard a startling confession. Seegee admitted he started the 1944 circus fire in Hartford, along with others in New England. Seegee was 14 years old at the time of the fire in Hartford. He joined the circus in Portland, Maine on June 30th and worked at various tasks until the fire. He went back to Maine shortly after the blaze. Psychiatrists examining Seegee reported that he was a psychotic who claimed he started the circus fire because an Indian appeared in a dream and told him to do so. He drew a picture of the Indian and composed other drawings of his dreams. Seegee recanted the confession and was never charged or even brought to Connecticut for questioning. Also in the 1950s, Donald Cook began to think that Little Miss 1565 might be his sister Eleanor. She was probably killed at the fire along with her brother Edward, but her body, unlike Edward's, was never identified.
For 1955, I went to the state police barracks in Hartford and told them it was my sister. And they said I was wrong. I didn't know anything I was talking about.
In the 1960s, Donald Cook was shown the morgue photograph by state police officer Anna DiMatteo. DiMatteo had once worked with Donald Cook at an orphanage and recalled their conversations about the circus fire and his missing sister Eleanor. Now she went out to solve the mystery.
They had somehow garnered a photo and brought it to me and asked if that was my sister. I thought yes it was, but we wanted to have my aunts take a look at it. It was Marion Parsons and Dorothy Andrews, which Dorothy was Marion's sister. Dorothy Andrews was sort of on the fence, and Marion said absolutely not. And so rather than push it any further, we just let it drop.
Eleanor's mother, Mildred, was never shown the photograph. The family isolated her from any information about the fire and felt that she would be destroyed by viewing it.
People don't understand that you protect your family somehow. And that's what my Aunt Marion Parsons was doing, protecting her sister-in-law, Emily Gill, and also my mother and whoever else. If there had been a problem with identification at that time, my mother was hoping that Eleanor would show up. We just decided not to show it to her. We didn't even tell her.
In 1967, Detective Lowe died. Barber continued their tradition of placing flowers on the grave of Little Miss 1565 until his death 10 years later. The parallel mysteries of the identification of 1565 and C.G.'s possible role in the circus fire became consolidated in the 1980s by Hartford arson investigator Rick Davey. Davey, prompted by personal interest and doubts about the original investigation, pursued the case in his off hours, quietly collecting evidence that he hoped would solve the mysteries. Davey's colleague, Thomas Goodrow, worked the case with him.
The moment for me which kind of gelled all of this and made it all seem to flow in a general direction was probably when I realized that the real story for me wasn't the arson. It was Eleanor Cook, Little Miss 1565. The method was kind of laborious. I had to, once I determined that Eleanor Cook was my most likely candidate, I had to locate family members. So I began a letter writing campaign to virtually any cook in the phone book in the state of Connecticut. And wrote to them, said, explained briefly what I was doing, why I was doing it, and asked if they could help.
Donald Cook had moved from Connecticut to Iowa, but Davey's letter was forwarded to him. When Donald Cook contacted him, Davey had his major break in the case.
I was greatly relieved, somewhat surprised, and kind of nervous about it. I was now on the track towards my goal, towards the end frame of my goal. I wasn't sure if the family really understood what I was doing, if the family concurred. It was all a big mystery as far as I was concerned.
In 1991, Davey released his findings. 1565 was Eleanor Cook.
The comparison of the photos for me was what did it. If you look at photos long enough, you can find subtle differences. I had years in order to do that, and hours and hours with which to do it. So for me, that was the way it went. But before I could say anything positive, I had to understand if the family concurred. So I sent my photos, all that I had gotten, with the exception of a few, out to Donald and let him look at them. He decided that he would prefer to do that rather than his mother because he didn't want to burden her with that responsibility. And having done so, he returned them, said yes, that was his sister.
The death certificate for 1565 was amended by Chief Medical Examiner Wayne Carver. The body of 1565 was exhumed and reinterred in Massachusetts next to Edward Cook. Mildred Cook was pleased that her daughter had been found and returned home. Davey and Goodrow's findings as to the cause of the fire brought state police detectives back on the case. Detectives interviewed C.G. but found no evidence linking him to arson.
With as many people that were there, nobody ever saw anybody start this fire. Could it have been an arson fire? Our finding is undetermined. I have no evidence that it was an arson fire.
The cause of the fire, however, was reclassified as undetermined from the original finding that a cigarette ignited the blaze.
We proved that a cigarette alone in grass could not have started this fire with the humidity at the point that it was.
Despite these developments, the circus fire continued to spawn controversy. In 1999, Author Stuart Onan completed a book on the circus fire. He concluded that 1565 was not Eleanor Cook.
The lack of evidence that 1565 is Eleanor Cook is, I think, convincing. The dental charts don't match. The dental chart for 1565 is for a girl who's between 5 and 6 years old, whereas Eleanor Cook is 8.5 years old. The body size, the height, and the weight are for a girl who's between 5 and 6 years old. And Eleanor Cook supposedly was tall for her age. The clothes don't match. So all the major physical markers do not match. There's no forensic evidence that ties 1565 to Eleanor Cook.
Donald Cook stuck with Davy's findings. Rick Davy, Stuart Onan, Ed Lowe, Tom Barber, and reporters such as Lynn Toohey of the Hartford Courant worked tirelessly and with the noblest of intentions to solve the fire's mysteries. They firmly wanted the dead to rest in peace and for the survivors to know what had happened to them and why on July 6, 1944. All believed they had succeeded. The one answer that does count for relatives of the dead and the survivors was delivered a week after the fire in a church. Responding to reports of people questioning why so many had died in such a happy place, the Reverend Stanley Manning of the Church of the Redeemer in West Hartford pleaded with his congregation. When stark and sudden tragedy comes upon a community, he preached, we cannot help thinking about it, asking unanswerable questions, perhaps seeking someone to blame. But don't blame God, Manning said. People were killed simply because of human failures and mistakes and carelessness. He concluded, the fire should be remembered chiefly for that, and not its mysteries.